Welcome to LATAM Weekly, where I bring you the most up-to-date coverage from across the Latin American world. This week, we're starting in El Salvador, where police announced in a tweet on Monday that 30,000 people have been rounded up and arrested due to the President Nayib Bukele's state of exception, which was called back in April and is due to be extended for another 30 days. Well, on Friday 25th of March, all gang members of MS-13 were sent the same text message, Adelante, which essentially means go ahead. This caused a wave of violence to break out across El Salvador, with over 80 people being killed in a single weekend. El Salvador has seen drug violence and drug deaths decrease to around 3 a day in recent years, and now that weekend caused those figures to go up by 30 a day. And a state of exception was Bukele's response. This essentially means the police in El Salvador can arrest people without a warrant. The government is looking to get deadly drug violence under control. However, many groups such as Amnesty International see this attempt by Nayib Bukele as a form of getting rid of his political opponents and journalists and people involved in his rise to power, because as many of you know, he is the world's coolest dictator. In El Salvador, MS-13 and Barrio 18 are two of the biggest drug trafficking groups that transport drugs northwards towards North America, and between them they have about 70,000 members, so 30,000 arrests, if Bukele is actually doing this properly, is a extreme number of arrests. But like I say, this has called for criticism from groups such as Amnesty International, who say that many of the arrests have been arbitrary and also include minors who are not even loosely connected to the conflict. It could just be seen as smoke and mirrors for the population to believe that he is doing a good job. The flip side of this is many El Salvadorians see the violence as something that needs to be put under control. And these are not empty threats from Amnesty International, because Nayib Bukele last year removed 5 Supreme Court judges and the Attorney General. So it is no secret that the Bitcoin buccaneering president wants to get rid of opposition and pave the way towards his much desired constitutional change, which he has not been so quiet about. His vice president, Felix Ulloa, has described the arrests as part of jus ad bellum. This essentially means right to war, and is essentially the government's justification to wage this war on drug trafficking, if it is. Crazy situation. Moving over to Havana, the US has rolled back some Trump-era restrictions on foreign travel for Cubans. It also has lifted the gap on remittances. This is essentially allowing the dollar to flow back into Cuba and provide some much needed security for families that have been unable to access the money from their family abroad in the US. Cuban families have been crippled by the COVID-19 pandemic and the effect of US sanctions under President Donald Trump. Up to 80,000 Cubans have tried to leave in the last 6 months, albeit successfully, and they've ended up at the southern border of Mexico. The majority of migrants transit through Nicaragua. That is because in November last year, the Nicaraguan government got rid of visa requirements for Cubans, saying that it was a measure to promote tourism, industry and commercial success. However, Nicaragua are not really an ally, let's just say enemy of the US, and they will do anything to upset things at the southern US border and aggravate the United States. And by that, they mean send Cubans through to the US's southern border, so it's their problem to deal with. This mass exodus of Cubans is almost similar to that of the Mariel boat lift. The Mariel boat lift was an exodus of 125,000 Cubans in 1980 trying to leave Castro's Cuba. This was essentially when Cuba's leader Fidel Castro said that the Cubans are free to leave the country if they leave from the Maribel Harbor to the US. Most Cubans are received well by the United States. However, there is a lingering distrust from the Cuban state over allowing this many people to leave the country, and it raises fears back home that the Cuban government is going to crack down on dissenters, in which there is probably not going to be many left after levels of migration like this. Let us know what you think of the Cuban situation in the comment area, or however, just let me know. Moving over to another country in which the US has frosty relations with, Venezuela, who have been suffering from the worst humanitarian and economic crisis in decades. This week, US officials decided to lift previous embargoes that have been aimed at hurting the Venezuelan economy. Certain restrictions on Venezuelan individuals have been removed, and the operations of oil company Chevron have been allowed to progress, although at a limited capacity. Now, most of these sanctions were going to be lifted in October. However, Venezuelan president and strongman Nicolas Maduro decided to scrap the talks. This is due to the US's extradition of Alex Saab, a Colombian individual with very close ties to the Venezuelan government. He was extradited in the island of Africa called Cape Verde, and yeah, that ruined the talks. However, opposition leaders and the Venezuelan government having these talks in Mexico is a positive sign for a country in which recent years have led 6 million Venezuelans to flee to neighbouring countries such as Peru, Colombia, Chile, Argentina, Brazil, across Latin America and beyond. Inflation in the country has reached record-breaking levels, and many Venezuelans live on less than $1 a day. Maduro's authoritarian style of leadership is unwelcomed by many Venezuelans, although most of them do not have a choice in the political direction of the country. Opposition leader Juan Guaido believes that these new talks pave the way for a set of free and fair elections in 2024. US efforts to ease the sanctions are part of a strategy to bring Maduro back to the negotiating table. That's the word. Being a cynical motherfucker, I believe that the US, obviously dealing with the current Ukraine crisis, wants to get its hands on Venezuela's oil reserves, which are said to be some of the largest, if not the largest, untapped oil reserves in todo el mundo. As prices go crazy, the US is looking for other sources of natural gas, oil, all that good stuff. So looking towards Latin America is a natural move to stabilise oil prices. Kind of annoying that the biggest bit of news to come out of Central America is either Bitcoin's crash in El Salvador or drug trafficking. And unfortunately, I'm just going to tell you what's happened. Linda Bobadilla of the Montes drug cartel has been captured 2 weeks after her arrest warrant was issued by the United States government. She had a $5 billion trillion bounty on her head. She is one of the infamous Las Patronas, which is basically women that run these big drug cartels. And she was captured along with her 2 sons, or 2 of her sons, one of which was killed and the other which fled the scene, and now he is also being searched for. The current Honduran administration is trying to rid itself of the previous administration's links to the drug trade, in which there was a huge corruption scandal. I wouldn't say scandal, it was proven that the former president was involved in numerous accounts of drug trafficking. However, the US continues its futile war on drugs, because what's going to happen is the cartels are either going to move to another country, or the gap is just going to get filled and a huge vacuum of violence and misery is going to continue. What does this mean? This means that the US can continue to invest in places which have a low sense of security, therefore can get stuff at dirt cheap prices. Never call me a slave of the US, okay? They do some good things, they do some bad things, but my cynical mind tells me they're gonna fucking smash up the country with investment because it's cheap. Who was that guy that said buy it cheap, blood in the streets, blood in the streets, buy it cheap? God knows. Some investor twat. Argentina, love it, great place, but some crazy shit is happening. I believe it is the indigenous tribes of Com and Moquit. These 2 indigenous peoples in the northern region of Chaco in Argentina have essentially won a package of reparations, although it is not financial compared to the situation that has happened in Canada. Anyway, the two peoples received their reparations after a Supreme Court judge in Argentina ruled that the state in 1924 massacred 400 indigenous people. Yeah, I forgot to tell you, this happened in 1924 and it has been just under 100 years and the state have never ever repented or admitted to their crimes. Immigrant farmers from Europe enslaved these two indigenous groups and made them work on cotton plantations. Yes, it wasn't just in the US as well. Latin America was also, probably up until more recently, dealing with these kind of issues. This is a huge boost to indigenous causes around Latin America, in which the reparations that have been sought have resulted in the massacre being added to Argentina's school syllabus, and also an increased effort in terms of forensics to find the bodies of the 400 people that were murdered in those communities. Now, Latin America has a huge conundrum at the moment with its indigenous people because there's exploitation of natural resources which infringes on their land, or there's simply a high level of racism, or in other cases it's simply not admitting their past problems, whether that be literally going into these places and founding a country on top of the ruins of indigenous societies. Most of these indigenous groups just want respect and they want their natural birthright and birthplaces to be respected by the states of today. Chile is dealing with these problems, Ecuador, Peru, Bolivia. Actually, Bolivia is a bit of an exception because Bolivia is essentially ruled by indigenous people. But I have done a TikTok on this kind of stuff before, so if you want to go and check it out, it's quite an interesting topic and I really want to learn more about it because I feel it's extremely important to preserve the heritage of these communities and preserve the wisdom of their teaching, because they can teach us a lot of things about the natural world that we basically can't do in the developed world. We are reliant on artificial and manufactured ways of doing things, and we believe in modern medicine, processed food, and they believe in the land and the sun and the earth and the moon. In other news, we're moving over to Mexico. In the state of Guerrero, they have legalized abortion. This is the 9th state in Mexico to do so, whilst their northern neighbours are contemplating reducing the abortion rights for women. However, you've got to remember in Mexico that abortion is only legalized up to 12 weeks, so it doesn't go as far as in other countries. Lawmakers voted to legalize it by 30 votes to 13. It makes Roe v. Wade look very weak and futile, you know? People say that Latin America is behind. I believe that is utterly false. I don't get where this narrative comes from. Of course, there are some things that they need to improve on. Every country has things that they need to improve on in relative terms. But anyway, elsewhere in Mexico, the government decided to curb import duties on key staples of food such as beef, corn, rice. You know what I'm talking about. This is key to curbing inflation in Mexico, who are also suffering, like pretty much everyone, from rising food prices around the world. And this is obviously going to be a welcome relief to Mexicans who could potentially get their food at cheaper prices, although I don't believe this is going to happen because most retailers and manufacturers will not pass on the prices. By that I mean they won't pass on the prices to consumers, and this is a very sneaky move in other ways. It means big companies in Mexico can charge more or pretty much the same for their food while saving shitloads of money. In Chile, Gabriel Boric, their new young and leftist firebrand president, has raised the spice levels. Forget that. He's raised the minimum wage in response to a global price hike. This is a stark contrast compared to Mexico. And a bit of news from Colombia. The ELN, one of the infamous guerrilla paramilitary groups, has announced a 10-day ceasefire from activities during the Colombian presidential election, in which leftist candidate Gustavo Petro is seeking to become the first leftist president in Colombian history. Also, his vice president is going to be black, which is a huge political statement for Colombians, in which Afro-Colombians are a huge part of the population. Conservative candidate Federico Gutierrez is also leading second in the polls at the moment, and both candidates have been using TikTok to their advantage in what many have called the first election to be decided by TikTok. So, interesting one, but hopefully, actually no, I'm not going to say. Soy imparcial entre ellos. And now we're heading back to last week's fiasco, in which 2 more countries have announced that they're not going to come to President Biden's big fat America's party. And when I talk about big fat American party, I'm not talking about US obesity levels. I'm talking about the America's Summit. And this week, Guatemala and Nicaragua have said they are not going to attend the Los Angeles America's Summit, where diplomatic delegations get together and have a big jolly up and pat each other on the back and talk about how great Latin America and North America is and how they can do further collaboration, which ultimately never happens. This is turning into a bit of a diplomatic nightmare for the US Secretary of State and Joe Biden, who are essentially getting all their invites rejected. Brazil and Bolivia have also shown their disdain for the America's Summit, with Bolivia saying they're not coming, and Brazil, you know, Bolsonaro saying he's probably not going to turn up. Mexico has also been pretty vocal about this. However, this is because the US doesn't seem likely to invite Cuba or Venezuela. Now, you can't really exclude people from a party where everyone should be invited. I mean, that's just basic party schisms, you know? So yeah, diplomatic nightmare, but next week, special week, because the Colombian presidential election is going to be happening. And is it next week or week after? I don't know. May 29th though. And I'm going to bring you some of the results and what is happening from that time. So yeah, thanks again for watching LATAM Weekly. I'm just trying to find my feet again, so thank you for watching. Any corrections, please just send them to me in a message. Follow my Instagram, follow my TikTok, or read my articles if you want. I occasionally do them. But yeah, thank you for watching. Even if I get 1, 2, or 3 views on this, you know, it means the world. Great. It means that people are listening, and I'm bringing you some educational value content-ish.